You're listening to Chicago Stories, a podcast from City Hall featuring the stories of everyday Chicagoans, as told to Mayor Ron Emanuel.
This is Mayor Ron Emanuel with Chicago Stories with our guest, Ron Grossman, a columnist at the Chicago Tribune. Do you still call yourself a historian and now a journalist, or a journalist historian? How do you...
Let me give you the term of art.
Oh, okay,
within
yeah.
the Tribune.
I don't want to insult the academic research. Are you tenured?
No, I gave up tenure to go there.
What is the proper...
I don't know if it's proper, but in the 35 years I've been there, I've been called professor.
Professor.
And depending on the intonation, it's either a compliment or don't be such a wise guy.
Yeah. Well, are the politics of the newsroom as bad as the politics of academia?
You know, when I first got into it, they would break me in by saying, you know, this one is going after that one is going to be... And I'd listen, I'd say, this is penny ante stuff to what I just came from.
Yeah. You know the famous Kissinger quote.
Oh, yes.
When they ask him, are you ready for the politics and the backbiting in Washington, he says, it's nothing compared to the backbiting in Harvard.
I had a moment of nostalgia. I was sent out to Stanford one time to do something and taken to the faculty dining room, seated at a group of people, and we're talking about blah, blah, blah. And then two of them started talking about a dispute on campus, and then kind of got a little bit ashamed that they're leaving.
There's simultaneous translation on this show.
Yes. Got a little bit, we're leaving them out of the conversation. No. I know what you're talking about. Plus, I bet that A is going to pull this mood on B. And they said, how do you know that? I said, I was in the business for 25 years.
So let me add, you're a historian and appreciator of Chicago's neighborhoods and its history.
Yes.
A lot of people go from journalism to writing a history book.
Yeah.
You're a historian that's gone into journalism. You're driving on the wrong side of the road, if I can say.
So I'm Yiddish and English.
You're reading from right to left again.
Exactly.
No, but on a serious, so many people traveled the other road.
Yes.
You're traveling an unfamiliar road.
Yes.
Was it a hard transition? What's it like? And what do journalists think of a historian that's trying to copycat a journalist? And what's a translation? Is it hard?
At the time, it was necessary. Because I was beginning to burn my bridges in academia because I was writing for the popular press, and that's a kind of a no-no.
Yeah, that's you're not going to dumb yourself down, are you, for the rest of us plebeians?
That's sort of it, yes. In Europe, it's done because generally journalists there don't make enough money, so a lot of them are professors that double as that. In the United States, it's kind of, you've gotten off to the wrong side of the track kind of thing. Remember, academia is, for better or worse, a wonderfully isolated world, wonderfully isolated. And when you break that, it's kind of hard to do it. So I was already writing for the Tribune and Chicago Magazine and other things. And when something came out, the administration of the college, I was at Lake Forest at the time, and certainly the fundraisers thought it was fabulous, but then other things would happen.
And so now you've cut your relationship to academia.
Yes.
You've seen a lot of politics in Chicago, a lot of history.
Yes, I've practiced it myself.
Okay, yeah. So what's your favorite political story?
Let me tell you my own experience.
Okay.
Before I got into full-time at the Tribune, so this was not a conflict of interest, I owed then Senator and Ward Committeeman Jack Merlo a favor. And he said, here's what I need.
And let me guess, as an alderman, he didn't forget that you owed him.
No. In fact, I owed him the favor for something that brought us up to the office here. We wanted to appeal something, and he said, we got to go to the 5th floor.
Yeah.
I don't know how you're addressed, but in those days it was like Hashem. You didn't use the name. So anyway, he said, look, I'm running.
It had to be a big favor then. If it's coming upstairs, that's not a nickel and dime.
Well, I had 600 signatures on a petition. That moved it along quickly. So he said, look, I'm running one of my precinct captains for state rep. Can you watch over that precinct for me? So I said, yes. I don't know if people in other parts of the world know that it's not like, I don't know how it is now, but especially then, it was not like in the civics book where you'd look up and say, according to the law, this officer is in charge. The precinct captain was it.
Right.
And so the night before the election comes to my house a guy from the Board of Education, and he gives me a box of ballots and stuff like that. And he takes a little American flag out of his belt and hands it to me. From that point on, I'm the guardian of democracy in the 24th Ward of the 44th Precinct.
I think it's the 44th Ward.
44th
Ward.
yeah.
20. Just for the record, the mayor corrected the historian. I just would like the record to show. Okay.
So next day I go there and I put my little flag up and it starts off. And now I have my crew. I find out that I'm not in fact the acting precinct captain, because there is a precinct captain, but he is so old that he lives
Jack did not trust him.
He lives in the suburbs.
Yeah.
His chief duty is to come down, bring a box of candy, set it down, shake hands, and go. I have an assistant precinct captain who's there as a kind of indentured servant. It was explained to me he's a keeper at the Lincoln Park Zoo. Mm-hmm. And one day he left the owl cage door open and 2 owls flew away. Mm-hmm. It was stressed, and it was the 2 that got him into problem. Mm-hmm. 1, no. Mm-hmm. 2, he's got to do this. Mm-hmm. We start off the day, and in the middle of the day, one of the voting machines breaks. This was in the days when the voting machine looks like a grand piano. It's a busy precinct along Rosco between Sheridan Road and Broadway, and the lines are creeping up like mad. People are complaining.
Not far from Nettlehurst Elementary School.
Yeah, just down the block from there.
Yeah.
So, people are complaining, we got to go to work, blah, blah, blah. Half the audience are older and retired. Half are young people going to be downtown. So I jump up on a table. I say, okay, here's the rule. Until the Board of Ed can fix that machine, I want everybody who's not working to step back and let the young people up. The young people like this. Some of the old people start kvetching.
Right.
So I yell out, does anybody have a better idea? Total silence, and it works that way. That's Churchill said.
Today you would have an independent investigation.
Oh my goodness! I'd be here in chains.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
Did the state rep win?
No.
Okay. Well, it was a short tenure as a precinct captain, but you're a better journalist than that.
I've lasted longer. Let's say that.
Is there another favorite story that goes down in the lore that you've reported on, or covered, or saw in Chicago?
Anything to do with the first mayor, Daly, was fabulous.
Why is that?
Because he had such a wonderful way of speaking the English language. Mm-hmm. There was always copy there. Mm-hmm. One day, my wife and I, my then wife, and I were walking along City Hall. Out comes Mayor Daly. Yeah. Comes out, and he's discussing somebody, and they all have hats on. Mm-hmm. As they pass us, he whips his hat, well, let's put it that way, and all 3 genuflect to us. I don't mean literally so, but that's the way it happened.
All right. When you're writing about a moment in time, recently, the last couple of years, that you said, I thought I knew everything about this, but having done more research, I've now discovered I only knew the mythology or cursory.
Yes.
And what would give us one of those stories where you learned something once you started digging into it that you had no idea?
Can I give you a bit of advice?
Sure.
When I get stumped, I call Alderman Burke. He's a wonderful historian.
He will, I think, for the first time, tune in to my podcast now that you said that.
He has saved me several times. One time I was working on a story on the so-called Cross of Gold speech that William Jennings Bryan gave in Chicago.
Right. 1896.
It's very good. And somewhere along
Hello.
2 points for the mayor.
How'd I do in your history class? Would I gotten out? I don't think I would have gotten into Lake Forest, but I definitely would have gotten out.
Exactly. And somewhere along the line, I picked up the idea that the hall that convention was held in was in Jackson Park. And I was about to say, standing approximately where second base is now, and something crossed my mind. I called the alderman. He said, no. Go down 63rd Street to the railroad embankment. I forget if he said it's on this side or that. That's where it was. Like that.
In Englewood.
Englewood.
Yeah. The big rail yard there.
Yep.
Coming up to the Dan Ryan.
Yep.
Exactly.
Yeah. Do I get stumped by things all the time? No matter how much you know, there's more there. Mm-hmm. That's why we have been doing these historical throwback series for 6 years without ever having to repeat ourselves.
Let me ask you a question, which I find as mayor.
Yes.
We are a strong city council,
right?
Yet historically and by culture, a strong mayor.
Exactly.
How does that happen? I mean, think about it. The rules
Yes.
put the weight of equity on the council, not the mayor.
Yes.
Yet, based on history, personalities, I think would be a component of that, and function, we actually are a strong mayoral system, but not by law.
Right.
And where do you think that, is it Thompson? Is it Daly? Where do you think that
No, it's
flipped?
before them. It's
You think before them?
It goes back to the days when there were 2 aldermen in every ward, so they could kind of gang up on the mayor. And what's the polite term? The cash flow went through their hands rather than the mayor's hands. Yes, it is true. If you look at the books, this is a so-called strong city council, weak mayor, but it's traditionally functioned the other way.
My instincts tell me that around Thompson, it comes to the mayor, and then we start a pattern that just the mayor becomes a strong. That's my instincts, but I don't know when.
What the mayors begin to do is to realize that we got to run it like a feudal system. We will accord them autonomy as long as they give us deference. It's just like in the Middle Ages.
No, it's like the other thing is the cut. My cursory reading of the history is we allowed the aldermen to think that they were the mayor of their area.
Oh,
but
yes.
that the mayor would then
Yeah,
assume the responsibility of the city as a whole. And that's where the mayor starts to accumulate the power.
And the whole system functioned that way. In my youth, now we're talking the Pleistocene age.
Right. We're talking about when there were horse and buggies before.
Exactly.
That period of time, yeah.
Police districts roughly corresponded to the wards. And it is said, that's the way to cover yourself on these things, that if a police chase started in one ward and laughed over, the cops would say, well, let them handle it and go back again. It was decentralized in terms of what belonged to whom.
Unbelievable. So you grew up in Albany Park.
Yes, I did.
Did you ever that's where you grew up?
Yes.
Where did your family settle when they came to Chicago?
Lawndale.
So that's the same thing as Grandpa Herman Schmolowitz, my grandfather that came. What year did they come?
The story is most dramatic on my
This is Midrash.
mother's, yes, for the
also-
audience, commentary.
Yeah, that's right. 10% truth, 90% inflation.
Storytelling to illustrate its theme, whether the story is true or not. My maternal great-grandmother had a little apple orchard outside of Białystok in what's now Poland.
Right.
Her husband was a Talmudic scholar, sitting in the synagogue basement with his buddies all day and discussing points of law.
Doing nothing of productive.
No, of course not.
Couldn't raise a family.
Leaving
on
all
that.
the rest to her.
Right.
Somehow, she realized that the good days, such as they were for Jewish people in that part of the world, were coming to a close. So every year, if there was money left over, she would send a child to America.
Huh. One by one.
One by one. My uncle Velvo, Willie, told me that his mother explained to him, so you'll be having your bar mitzvah in the new world. That means he was less than 13. I wrote about this when
By himself.
By himself. I wrote about this when the flack came up about unaccompanied minors being caught in the United States. My grandfather was an unaccompanied minor. Sent the first one over and then the other.
He was also undocumented, for the record.
Probably,
Yeah.
sure. I mean, in those...
My grandfather, 13 years old by himself.
Yeah. Well, actually, what they did with the first one, they found someone coming over, a family,
And he went with them?
arranged with the family to get him through Ellis Island.
Right.
So when he got there, they're checking them in and saying this one and this one, and their name was Weinberg. So they asked him, and who is that boy there? And they said, Nachal Weinberg. He's also a Weinberg, which makes us the Komanoviches of Białystok and the Weinbergs of Lawndale.
So you settle in Lawndale.
Yes.
And when does that's where my grandfather met my grandmother at a dance for Eastern European Jews from Romania in Douglas Park. So when does the family move to the uptown of Albany Park? That's got to be in 1940s, 50s, 40s?
No, in 1930s.
30s.
My parents were married just before...
I can't believe Jake Harvey let you guys go.
Well, you had to come back and work a precinct.
In the famous 24.
Yes, of course. That's why I got confused on the numbers before. The Ravenswood L.
I feel like I'm in a Zero Mostel movie here for a second, but go ahead.
The Ravenswood L had just opened up. So for young marrieds, it was to move that way. Huh. That is to Albany Park.
Right.
The
Kimball stop.
the Depression got in the way of it. So the story goes. Shortly after I was born at Bethany Hospital on the west side, they moved north.
Not the west side, the west side.
The great west side with a
West
V.
side.
With a V.
Exactly.
The mayor has done his homework.
I grew up with this.
They moved up to Albany Park. But then as times got tough, they would move back. So we went back and forth.
I see.
Back and forth. The one I remember, we were living on Kedzie, just down from that synagogue, 2 families in a 1-bedroom apartment.
In Albany Park?
In Albany Park, yeah.
And where'd you go to school? High school?
Lane Tech.
Okay.
Another story?
Yeah, my mother went to von Steuben.
Oh, that was the Mecca for us.
Yeah. I always thought there was some not so great poetry that the Jewish population of Albany Park went to a school named after a German.
Yes,
general.
of course.
Yeah,
yeah.
von Steuben. So
years later, what happened was that Lawrence Avenue was on the boundary between von Steuben to the north,
right.
Roosevelt to the south. The girls from von Steuben were considered, that was what we wanted. The boys from Roosevelt were generally denied. Years later, the Board of Education, and what we might courteously say was an attempt to balance out blah, 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 or really to perpetuate such.
So you're telling me CPS school lines had fights then? Between
it's again like academia. And so a number of African American students from the south and west sides were allowed to transfer up there. I couldn't resist that. So I went to interview
This is at Roosevelt?
At Roosevelt.
Yeah.
I went to interview them, and I said, well, what is it like here now? And they said, well, the African-American girls were sent to von Steuben. I says, what's the problem? They won't date us. The same prejudice it had survived a total change of ethnicity.
What's your favorite neighborhood to cover in Chicago that tells a story you think of the kind of history of the city?
I have one in the paper tomorrow about Division Street.
Okay.
And the beauty there is how many people have come down it, how many different groups have come down it. The reason I wrote it was that I assumed that the Division Street that I remember, the one that Algren described.
With all the Russian baths?
Exactly.
Yeah.
That Algren described, that Saul Bellow described, that's gone. And there would be no literary tradition. Then by virtue of another story I did, I found out about David Hernandez, a Puerto Rican poet who wrote a book of poems of his growing up, and I read them, I said, change the proper names, and it's the exact same thing over again. So I walked Division Street, moaning and groaning about what's not there, and reading this book of poems, mythologically reading the book of poems, to show that it's the same experience.
Yes.
The same experience.
Yeah, well, here's the thing that I always find.
Incidentally, that'll be in the paper tomorrow, and anybody that buys it will help with my retirement should I ever take it, please. Please.
So I just came back from a lunch on Devon Avenue. And I said, Devon Avenue to me captures all of Chicago.
Oh, yes. Yep.
Because you can start on one end,
Yes.
and in the storefront is a picture of Gandhi.
Yes.
And when you get to the other end of the street, about 5 blocks down, is a picture of Golda Meir.
Yes.
And these days they have Menachem Begin, but that doesn't work. Poetry between Gandhi and Golda. But that is the story.
If they haven't changed it, at Western and Devon,
At Western and Devon, yeah.
one way is an honorary street for Golda Meir,
Yeah.
and the other way for Gandhi.
Yeah, exactly. It captured. I mean, now why do you think there are like divisions east-west, Devon east-west? Our north-south streets don't have that, tell that story the same way.
They don't. I don't know why. Some streets
They don't tell the same story, kind of like that's Little
Where?
Indy. You know, they refer to it, that's Little Indy. You look at Taylor, that's Little Italy.
Yeah.
That is the street that captures the community.
Exactly. But diagonal streets will do that, like Milwaukee running north. You can see the German and Polish. Archer Avenue going south, you can see the Irish. But you're right, outside of that, there is a distinction between the longitude and the latitude of our city. I think a task force to examine that, Mr. Mayor.
I think that's behind like 4 other topics I need a task force for. So tell me, what do you think has changed in the city and what is still the same?
I wrote a piece a few weeks ago about skyscrapers coming into Old Town where I now live. It used to be that the skyscraper was the center of the city and the villages were out there.
Yeah.
The village life is being impinged on by the growth of taller buildings.
So do you think we should keep the density out of the neighborhood?
Or find a way to put them up in the air so that little village life survives on the ground.
I find this one of the kind of, when somebody says describe Chicago, I always say it's a very big city but a small town.
Yeah.
Why do you think that is? Why do you think that we have something that L.A., Manhattan, or New York rather, or Philly don't, or Atlanta, Miami, the other big 9, do not have this big city cultural scope and breadth, but a feeling of a small town?
Because of the constant flow of immigrants, and each of whom grab a piece of real estate and only vaguely are aware that there's a city beyond that.
Mm-hmm.
Other cities, New York, Philadelphia, etc., they were established before the big years of immigration. Chicago is a city made of immigrants. When I was growing up, I knew exactly where the boundaries were between my neighborhood and someone else's.
And you didn't go?
Until I found books about it in the Chicago Public Library. And then it was with trepidation, And then it was,
there was still mental lines in your, there was
they're
lines
still
in
there.
your, yeah.
They're still
that
there.
You wouldn't cross that because you weren't welcome.
It was, I was once in a church in Canaryville, just south of Bridgeport.
Yeah.
And I was going to interview...
A very different community.
You'll hear. Still Harris.
Yeah.
And the pastor I was going to meet with the pastor because I was writing a story. There's a Easter play out there that's been going on for 3 generations. But he came out and he said, "Oh, Ron, excuse me for a minute. There's a couple back in there. I got to counsel them. Please, that kind of routine." Right. Finally, it's done, and he ushers me in there and he explains their concern because their son or daughter, I forget which, is marrying out of the neighborhood. And I thought, where? The ends of the earth? It was a marriage from Canaryville to Bridgeport. And that shocked the old people.
They had to pick there was a fight in the family which parish they would get married in, I bet you.
He had explained to them that life would go on even if they crossed that street. Those things go in your mind and they last.
No, it is. I still run into if somebody was raised in one neighborhood and when they get married themselves and they move to another, the parents still feel like the kids
they're lost. You have to sit.
They left, but they turn their back on.
As our people will say, you have to sit shiva for it.
Yeah.
You have to conduct a mourning ceremony.
If you were doing a history class on Chicago, give me the 3 books in your bibliography that are the must-read for your the Ron Grossman class on the history of Chicago. It could be on any politics, it could be art, whatever you would say. These are the 3 that are going to make up the history of Chicago.
Nelson Ogren, Chicago City on the Make.
Okay.
It's I guess the literary form is a prose poem about the city.
Okay.
And it sums it up, warts and all, better than anything I know.
Okay, that's one.
The other one is Studs Lonigan for the immigrant experience. I'll tell you why. I was living in Athens many years ago. I went there to teach for a year. And the real estate agent, I wanted to rent an apartment, sent me out with a fellow who spoke English. But he spoke South Side Chicago English. I said, "You've been there?" He said, "No."
It's not even a dialect. It's a contortion.
Exactly. And he said, "No, he's never been out of Greece. How did you learn to speak like that?" He had read Studs Lonigan.
I see.
It carried, and it made sense to him. So that's the growing up, coming of age novel. And then there's Bessie. I can't think of her last name.
You remember the title?
Yeah, she wrote a history of Chicago. She was a professor at the University of Chicago. She wrote a 3-volume history of Chicago. The name will come to me. And also a wonderful volume called How Others See Us, where she clipped together from the voyageurs down to the near time how foreign people came here and saw it. It's a wonderful collection. Betsy Pierce is her name, Pierrece.
I always refer when I have international visitors, fellow mayors, heads of prime ministers, etc., what we have here, I always tell them that Chicago is the most American of American cities.
Yeah.
Now, I steal that, and Burke and I go back because Ed Burke once said it. I told him, I said, that from now on is the mayor's phrase.
Yeah.
And maybe I'll give you credit, maybe I won't. But because I actually do think New York likes to think of itself as part of Europe.
Yeah.
L.A. likes to think of it self-contained to itself,
Right.
and looks to itself. And Chicago is the capital of the heartland of America. It makes up and it is the quintessential American city.
Oh, you bet. You bet. We used to belong to an organization, kind of people-to-people organization, where we would host visitors here.
Yeah.
And when Europeans come over, it doesn't matter what order they see the cities in. When they see Chicago, they say, this is it.
So I'll give you a little anecdote of my mayoralty.
Yes.
We're hosting NATO, which some people thought was crazy, but convinced President Obama to do it. I said, I worked out, I won't tell you how, but that all the world leaders, when they came over the lake towards the city.
Yeah.
So they could kind of get...
Yeah, that feeling.
Yes, the expansiveness of Lake Michigan, that it's not an oversized pond.
Yeah.
And that you look to this city that just pops at you.
Loom is the word.
And it was the first time Chancellor Merkel, Cameron, Root had ever been, and they were all taken. They kept telling Obama, we had no concept.
Yeah.
And they fell in love with the city.
Also, people around the world know Chicago, obviously for the Capone thing,
right.
but for other things as well. We were once, my wife and I, in a working class, very red bar in Rome. And here we are, two around the world, and it was a little standoffish. And finally they said, where are you from? And I said, Chicago. They said, the Haymarket riot. They didn't say riot, the Haymarket martyrs, and drinks all around. That's an episode in our history from 1886 that is sort of forgotten here, except when I write about it. But around the world, people know that.
It's if it wasn't for our immigrant culture, I don't think we would have this deep in the labor history that we do.
Oh, no, yeah, obviously.
So now we, in our office, did a little research, and you are a member in Albany Park of Temple Mount Sinai.
Yeah.
We talked a little beforehand.
Yes.
This is the temple my grandfather, Grandpa Herman, used to attend with Grandma Sophie. And on high holidays, when we were done with our synagogue services, which I would ended earlier than at Temple Mount Sinai,
Yes.
we would go end Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah. So you are a member of Grandpa Herman. I'm sorry, this is my radio show. You're a member of, your family was a member of Grandpa Herman's synagogue.
We're landsmen. We are landsmen.
Are you current on your dues? That's all I want to know at the synagogue. Because Grandpa Herman was 6'4". He was a meat cutter and truck driver. He would be the gombi that would bang if people were talking during the rabbi.
So Zion Shah still.
Oh, that's right. And he would slam his big mug fist. And there was that row off to the left of the bima. And that's where the Smolovitz and Emanuel family would sit.
I was working up on, I should have brought it. I was working up on my harmonica only last night, Fiddler on the Roof.
Now, what made you decide, and I don't mean to say this inappropriately,
Yes, no,
but at this point in your life,
Yeah.
that you're going to take up the harmonica and blues specifically, not classical jazz in the Jewish contribution to musical lore?
It was supposed to be blues. I went to the University of Chicago at a time where just off campus you could see the greats like Muddy Waters, Junior Wells, Little Walter, and you fall in love with it. It is so Chicago. It was lingering there and lingering. I had violin lessons as a kid, which is to
You
say,
got to be kidding me.
No.
That's what I had.
We were both Jewish and male.
I did a year and a half of it.
Yes. I did too and got nowhere. So for my 80th birthday, I say it's now or never. I'm giving myself lessons. There's a fellow in the western suburbs who's locally famous for teaching children. He taught one of our grandchildren. I call him up and John says, yes, I take adults too. So I go there and start playing. To this day, I go and a little kid comes out of his studio. I go in. Then I go out, another little kid goes in. I started playing blues, but I made a horrible discovery. Can I say it in the most un-PC fashion?
You're Jewish.
Yeah,
You've discovered you're Jewish?
I'm a white boy. Do you know the history of the harmonica? It was invented in Germany in order to play pa music. So it's got an octave here, right in the middle, and on either side they're missing notes because they weren't for playing the melody. On this side, if you blow, it goes and if you go draw, it goes umpa, 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 ah. If you want to play the whole thing, you have to create notes that aren't in there.
Huh.
It migrated to America, and the great blues players in the South figured that if you change the embouchure, you can play the notes that aren't there. At a certain point, I had to realize I am
Not going to make it. There's no third career here. Historian, journalist, blues harmonica player.
As I switched to the chromatic harmonica, which is twice as large, it has a little button. You press it in, that's the black notes on the piano. You let it go, that's the white notes. Any note you want to play, it's there. That's what I do.
All right, we do a fast round here.
Yes.
You ready?
Yes.
Okay. If anybody can do it, you can do it. Cubs or Sox?
Cubs.
Okay. Sears.
Wait.
It's like
I stood outside in 1945.
Oh.
Huh? I stood outside, and it lingered all those years. Years later, on one of the anniversaries, I did a story on it, and Phil Cavaretta was living in retirement someplace. I called him in Florida. My hero, I still see him walking down from Lane Tech to the ballpark. And at the end of the interview, he says, "Ron, could I ask you a favor? Yeah. Could you send me a copy of this?" I said, "Of course." He says, "I want to be able to show my grandchildren I was somebody." My kishkas were rent apart like that. I almost felt I would have to hand deliver. Go ahead. That's okay. That's what you.
So we got Cubs.
Cubs.
Sears or Hancock, and we're staying with the old names. We're not changing them.
Sears, because my mother worked at the old Sears on the west side.
Okay. Thick or thin pizza?
Thin.
Really? That's so.
In our pretentious years, my wife and I traveled to Italy.
Okay.
They don't know from thick pizza. We've been in the restaurant that invented pizza.
Okay.
At least they said it. I'm sure next door to next
Another
door.
midrash,
Yeah,
okay?
yeah.
Lake or river?
Lake. You know why?
Huh.
No other city has this lakefront like us. I was in
Four smart guys 100 and plus years ago
Yep.
came up with something.
I was in Cleveland once on a story, and I asked, "I'd like to see your lakefront." I said, "Oh, we got a nice one." Give me a map to go. You drive down to a factory here,
Right.
and there's 6 feet of beach. Here, from here to there, it's fabulous.
12-inch or 16-inch softball?
Sir,
Yes.
are you reading the mayor of Chicago?
Yeah, well,
16-inch.
That was a throwaway line, just in case you screwed up the first 4. We're with Ron Grossman from the Chicago Tribune, and let's just say from the old country, the West Side.
The great West Side.
Thanks for being here.
It was great fun. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, thank you.
You've been listening to Chicago Stories with Mayor Ron Emanuel. You can subscribe and leave a review on Apple Podcasts and tweet your guest ideas using #ShyStories. Thanks for listening.